The latest weapon to be showcased and made in Ukraine, the long-range Neptune missile.
Ukraine's newly developed Flamingo cruise missiles. Kiev has unveiled another new weapon, a cruise missile reportedly dubbed the Flamingo.
On August 30th, at dawn, Ukraine struck the Russian-occupied Armyansk outpost with a brand new weapon, the Flamingo FP-5 cruise missile. In minutes, one of Russia's most fortified intelligence bases was reduced to rubble. Radars were destroyed, communications severed, and Russian troops left blind and cut off. This is not just another missile strike. This is a turning point. The Flamingo missile, built entirely in Ukraine, carries more explosive power than a Tomahawk, flies twice as far, and costs half the price. And today, we're going to show you how this single weapon has changed the future of the war. At 5:30 a.m., Ukrainian drones and missiles crossed into northern Crimea. Their target, the Russian FSB outpost at Armyansk, in operation since Moscow's original 2014 invasion. Within half an hour, the base was gone. Here's what happened. Ukrainian drones struck first, disabling 2 critical radars. Then 3 Flamingo missiles followed. 1 failed, 1 went off target. But the third hit the command post with near-perfect accuracy, creating a 13-meter crater. By sunrise, Russian troops at Armyansk had no radar, no communications, and no coordination. Ukrainian drones circled back, destroying vehicles, fuel depots, and defensive positions. The result? A critical node of Russian control in Crimea wiped out in less than 30 minutes. The strike on Armyansk is proof of 3 things. 1. Crimea is no longer untouchable. 2. Ukraine's domestic weapons industry is now a game changer. 3. Russia's assumptions of safety inside Crimea are broken. And here's the question I want to see from you in the comments. Will Ukraine's Flamingo missile push Russia toward negotiation? Or will it drive Moscow into even greater escalation? After the dust settled over Armyansk, one question echoed across military and political circles. Where did this missile come from? The Flamingo FP-5 was not handed to Ukraine by NATO. It wasn't a secret American or British delivery. It was designed and built in Ukraine. And that fact alone makes this story remarkable. The Flamingo was developed by Firepoint, a defense company that didn't even exist before the war. Its founders were not military veterans or arms engineers. They were entrepreneurs from fields as far apart as construction, video game design, and architecture. But when Russia launched its full-scale invasion in 2022, they saw a gap. Ukraine needed weapons, and it needed them fast. Firepoint's first creations, the FP-1 and FP-2 drones, were built with limited resources but maximum creativity. These drones hit targets deep inside Russia, including oil depots and ammunition dumps. The world noticed, and soon, Firepoint had moved from being a small experimental startup to one of Ukraine's most important defense players. The Flamingo FP-5 is their most ambitious project yet. Let's break down why this missile is shaking Moscow. Length, 12 to 14 meters. Wingspan, 6 meters. Weight, 6,000 kilograms. Warhead, 1,150 kilograms, roughly twice the explosive power of the US Tomahawk Block V. Speed, 850 to 950 kilometers per hour. Range, up to 3,000 kilometers, allowing Ukraine to strike deep into Russian territory. Cost, under $1 million per unit, compared to over $2 million for a Tomahawk. Unlike Western systems that use expensive terrain-matching navigation, the Flamingo combines GPS, GNSS, and inertial navigation for accuracy within 14 meters. Not perfect, but when you're dropping over a ton of explosives, you don't need perfection. The Flamingo alters the battlefield in 3 critical ways. Reach, with a 3,000 kilometers range, targets once thought safe, oil refineries, command centers, naval bases, are suddenly exposed. Cost effectiveness, Ukraine can build 2 Flamingos for the price of 1 Tomahawk. In a war of attrition, that matters. Independence. By producing missiles domestically, Ukraine no longer relies solely on Western political decisions. That last point is vital. When Western governments hesitate or impose limits on how their weapons can be used, Ukraine has no such restrictions with the Flamingo. Kiev decides the targets. Kiev decides the timing. On August 17, 2025, Just 2 weeks before the Armyansk strike, President Zelensky unveiled the Flamingo to the public during a test launch in southern Ukraine. Hours later, he announced the beginning of serial production. Firepoint claims it can scale production to 210 missiles per month by October 2025. Skeptics question whether that's realistic, given the need for hundreds of jet engines. But even a fraction of that output would mean dozens of long-range strikes every week. And here's the truth. Even if Ukraine builds only 20 Flamingos a month, that's still enough to make Russian commanders in Moscow lose sleep. Let me put this question to you. If Ukraine manages to mass-produce 200 Flamingos a month, do you think Russia's oil and gas industry, the backbone of its war machine, could survive the pressure? Or would it finally bring the Kremlin to the negotiating table? Tell me in the comments. This isn't just speculation. Your thoughts help us understand how people around the world are reading the signals of this war. So far, we've seen how the Flamingo was created and why its technical specs are shaking the battlefield. But here's the deepest story. How did Ukraine pull off the Armyansk strike with such precision? What tactics and strategy made this operation so devastating? When history looks back at August 30th, 2025, it won't just see another strike in a long war. It will see the day Ukraine proved it could outthink and outmaneuver one of the most powerful militaries on Earth. The operation began not with missiles, but with drones. Specifically, UJ-26 Bobra loitering munitions, flying at low altitudes of just 150 to 180 kilometers per hour. These drones crept toward northern Crimea in the pre-dawn hours. Their mission: blind Russia's eyes and ears before the Flamingos even launched. The 96L6 cheeseboard radar, critical for detecting incoming aircraft and missiles, was the first to go. Without it, Russia's advanced S-300 and S-400 systems became half-blind. Next, the Mr. M1E coastal defense radar was struck. That system was supposed to monitor low-flying objects over the Black Sea. By the time it went offline, the path was open. Russian forces fought back. 2 Panzer S-1 NTS systems fired, downing a pair of drones. But it didn't matter. The damage had been done. The radar net was shredded. With Russian detection crippled, 3 Flamingo FP-5 missiles thundered across the Black Sea. 1 missile vanished before impact. Whether destroyed, malfunctioned, or lost a navigation error, it never hit the target. Another landed off-mark, detonating near a Russian hovercraft by the shoreline. An unintended but still damaging strike. The third missile, however, struck gold. It landed within 15 meters of the Armyansk command post. The explosion was massive. Communications gear, antenna arrays, and command infrastructure were obliterated. In a single moment, the Russian outpost lost both vision and voice. That's when the drones returned. Loitering munitions attacked fuel stores and ammunition depots, turning them into fireballs. FPV-style drones slammed into vehicles and defensive positions, overwhelming soldiers already in chaos. Without radar and communications, Russian troops couldn't coordinate countermeasures. By the end of 30 minutes, the Armyansk outpost, once a critical hub for Russian command in northern Crimea, was little more than smoking rubble. Official numbers from Moscow: silence. But independent Russian outlet Astra Press confirmed the death of at least 1 soldier. More importantly, satellite images showed the scale of destruction: a 13-meter-wide crater, multiple burnt-out vehicles, and blackened ruins where the outpost once stood. It wasn't the number of casualties that mattered. It was a strategic loss. Armyansk had been a forward intelligence and command hub for operations pushing north into Ukraine. With it gone, Russia's ability to monitor and coordinate in Crimea's northern corridor was temporarily crippled. What made the Armyansk strike so effective wasn't just the hardware. It was the sequencing. 1. Weeks of softening up. Ukraine had already been hitting radars and defenses around the isthmus with small strikes. By the time the main strike came, Russian systems were degraded and under pressure. 2. Drones first. Instead of firing missiles blindly, Ukraine used drones to suppress and blind radar, creating the window for Flamingos to enter. 3. Multi-layered attack. Even after the missiles hit, drones kept pressure on fuel, vehicles, and troops, ensuring chaos. This wasn't a single strike. It was a coordinated campaign compressed into half an hour. In the hours after the strike, Russian media scrambled to contain the story. State TV downplayed it as minor damage. Pro-Kremlin bloggers insisted air defenses had intercepted most of the threat. But reports on Russian Telegram channels painted a different picture. Soldiers describing communications blackouts. Locals reporting massive explosions and fires visible for miles. Frustration over how such a critical site could be hit so easily. The Kremlin, as usual, avoided specifics. But the silence itself was telling. For Ukraine, Armyansk was not just about one base. It was about sending a message. Crimea is no longer safe. Ukraine has its own long-range strike capability. Russia's best defenses can be bypassed. And for Russia, the implications are chilling. If Armyansk can be erased in 30 minutes, what about oil refineries deep in Russia? What about command centers in Moscow? What about naval fleets docked far from the front? The Flamingo has changed the equation. When the Flamingo was revealed, analysts immediately compared it to the gold standards of Western cruise missiles, the Tomahawk and the Storm Shadow. On paper, the Tomahawk has long been the benchmark, with precision, reliability, and decades of battlefield use. It's the system everyone else measures against. But the Flamingo didn't just measure up, it leapfrogged some benchmarks. Range: the Tomahawk Block V reaches ~1 600 km. The Flamingo, nearly 3,000 kilometers. Warhead: Tomahawk carries ~450 kg. The Flamingo's warhead is 1,150 kilograms, more than double. Cost: Tomahawk greater than $2 million per unit. Flamingo less than $1 million. Yes, the Flamingo is less accurate. 14 meters CEP vs 5 meters for the Tomahawk. But when your warhead is twice the size, missing by 14 meters doesn't matter. It still levels the target. Then there's the Storm Shadow or Scalp, which proved devastating in Ukraine's 2023 to 2024 strikes. Range: around 500 kilometers. Warhead: around 450 kilograms. Effective: yes, but the Flamingo blows past those numbers. Even Ukraine's own Neptune, which famously sank the Moskva, was designed for anti-ship roles with ranges of ~300-400 km. The Flamingo is in another class entirely. And perhaps the most important edge: sovereignty. Ukraine controls the Flamingo. Western weapons often come with political restrictions. You can't use them on Russian territory, or you must clear targets with allies. The Flamingo is different. When Kiev decides to strike, it strikes. The Kremlin's initial response to the Armyansk strike was predictable: denial, minimization, and propaganda. State TV described minor damage and emphasized that Russian defenses remain intact. But satellite imagery and local reports told another story. So what can Russia do against the Flamingo? 1. Reinforce Crimea's defenses. But their radars and S-400s are already stretched thin. Covering a 3,000 kilometers radius requires assets they don't have. 2. Deploy more mobile systems. Panzer and Tor vehicles can defend small areas, but they can't cover every base, depot, or refinery across Russia. 3. Electronic warfare. Jamming GPS signals could degrade Flamingo accuracy, but its initial guidance means it can still find its target even if satellites are jammed. 4. Propaganda. Moscow will try to frame every Flamingo strike as terrorism or Western involvement. But the truth, that these weapons are Ukrainian-made, undercuts that narrative. The reality is simple. Russia cannot defend everywhere at once, and every Flamingo built multiplies the pressure. The Flamingo doesn't just affect Ukraine and Russia. It reshapes the global conversation about the war. In Europe, frontline states like Poland, Lithuania, and Finland see the missile as reassurance, proof that Ukraine can keep Russia tied down without waiting for Washington. Public opinion remains firmly behind Kiev. In the United States, however, attention has waned. In 2022, 80% of Americans followed the war closely. By 2025, that number dropped dramatically. Aid packages stalled. Some politicians argued the war was Europe's problem. And yet, polls in mid-2025 showed a rebound. Over 60% of Americans still support military aid, with a slim majority even backing Ukraine's goal of regaining lost territory. That suggests a disconnect between Washington gridlock and public sentiment. NATO's concern is escalation. The Flamingo's ability to hit targets 3,000 kilometers away raises questions. What happens if Ukraine hits a refinery near Moscow? How will Russia retaliate? Could this drag NATO directly into the conflict? But the counterpoint is clear. Deterrence works when strength is visible. If Ukraine can strike at will, Russia must think twice before launching new offensives, not just in Ukraine, but anywhere along NATO's borders. The Flamingo isn't the end of the story. Firepoint and Ukraine's defense sector are already working on the next generation, FP-5, a medium-range ballistic missile, range up to 200 kilometers, designed for tactical battlefield use. FP-9, a strategic ballistic missile, range till to 855 kilometer, descending at high speeds to overwhelm air defenses. Bomber drones, continuously upgraded with thermal imaging, FPV control, and longer ranges, now hitting as far as Moscow. Ukraine's innovation is fueled by necessity. Unlike Russia, it can't rely on endless Soviet stockpiles. Every system it builds has to be efficient, cost-effective, and disruptive. And here's the most striking fact. The Flamingo is built for less than $1 million. In a war where Russia has lost billions and destroyed tanks, ships, and aircraft, Ukraine has created a weapon that delivers outsized results at bargain cost. This isn't just survival. It's a new model of warfare, one where smaller nations with tech-savvy industries can hold their own against superpowers. So what does the Armyansk strike mean for the future of this war? It proved that Crimea is vulnerable. It showed that Ukraine can build weapons to rival, and sometimes surpass, Western systems. It forced Russia to confront a new reality. Its command posts, fleets, and refineries are all within reach. The Flamingo FP-5 isn't just a missile. It's a statement of independence, innovation, and defiance. It tells the world, Ukraine will not wait for permission to defend itself. And perhaps most importantly, it signals that the balance of power in this war is shifting. Not because of NATO troops, not because of Western politics, but because Ukraine itself has found the tools to fight back. Do you believe Ukraine's weapons industry, not Western aid, will ultimately decide the outcome of this war? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We feature some of the best responses in future reports. If you found this breakdown valuable, like this video to push it further, and subscribe to Global Briefing for analysis you won't get on mainstream networks. This is more than a story about a missile. It's about a nation proving it can innovate, strike back, and change the course of history.